Thank you very much, Dennis. As with yesterday, I'm honored by the introduction. I'll try to live up to it. And thanks also to Dan, Beto, and others for having me here. Again, as I said yesterday, it's an honor to be here. It's a pleasure. I've had a wonderful time the last day and a half talking with doctoral students, undergraduates, master's students. Really first-rate program, one has had tremendous influence in criminology and criminal justice and continues to. So, again, I'm pleased to be here and share some ideas with you. As was suggested, I want to talk today about some ethnographies I've done. Over the past 15 years, I have done 3 long-term, in-depth ethnographies. Ethnography for the undergraduate students being in-depth field research where one immerses oneself in a situation or within a group of people, becomes part of that world, and tries to make sense of it. And so over the past 15 years, I've done 3 of these, roughly 5 years apiece, each one into some aspect of crime, and particularly urban criminality. And in the book, Ethnography at the Edge, Mark Ham and I wrote about the process of doing ethnography, although I want to talk probably more today about the findings than simply about the research method itself. Now, as we discussed to some degree yesterday, there are a number of ways that you could justify or begin to think about why one would do years-long studies within criminal worlds or out in urban situations rather than simply doing a survey or analyzing existing data. One would be personal predilection, a desire to discover the edge or to find out about alternative worlds. So one thing we often don't acknowledge in our field is that much of what we do is based partly on what we feel comfortable doing and what we want to do in our lives. As was talked about yesterday, one difference could be quantitative versus qualitative, that if one has a relative distrust of numbers as summaries of social reality, one might move past those numbers and into situations and situated meanings. So sometimes the difference will be personal taste, sometimes the difference in why one does deep field research compared to analyzing data might be a quantitative versus qualitative orientation. As we suggested yesterday, another possibility would be to look at this as a preference for narrative and for texture and detail in writing versus the sort of cleanliness and precision of numbers and statistics. That's another possibility as well. And as was also suggested yesterday, a final possibility would be a relatively humanist approach, looking at the human construction of meaning and reality, compared to one that takes a more scientific approach and looks at these constructions as quantifiable, measurable, definable, exterior to those who create them. Since I talked more about that yesterday, I actually want to address another reason for doing ethnography. And the reason I want to take this turn today is because of where we are in the program at Sam Houston. Again, a nationally, internationally known program in criminal justice. Many of you doctoral students will be teaching and doing your own research soon. And so instead of the deeper philosophical discussions about personal predilection or quantitative versus qualitative paradigms, I want to suggest today that ethnography is essential for simply sound criminal justice, that to understand the nature of crime and to develop policies that can reduce the harms done by crime and can treat those both victimized by crime and those participating in crime fairly, one needs to know the actual meanings of what's going on. If those meanings often don't survive the process of turning human activity into crime statistics or arrest categories, or that sort of thing. So beyond the philosophic reasons, I want to suggest there's a practical reason. Whatever one's take is on the death penalty, on street gangs, on domestic violence, however one sees that, you'll be better able to do your work and to address the problem humanely and in a fashion that solves that problem, I think, the more you know about its actual meanings. So, in that light, I want to talk a bit about 3 ethnographies I did and give you, again, more of a substantive feel for what was found than simply a talk about the methods. And for each of these, I want to follow a course, which is to tell you, for each of these 3 pieces of research I did, how they would show up in a crime database, how they would show up in local or state or national arrest records, or they might show up on a uniform crime report, and then talk about how that, in fact, would not be an accurate representation of what was going on. And if one assumed that, there would be serious mistakes made in terms of seeking justice, helping victims, prosecuting crime accurately, that sort of thing. So the first one, urban graffiti, which, again, was the book I wrote, Crimes of Style. Here are some of the offense categories that those arrested for doing urban graffiti fall under, and the way they show up both in the media and the way they show up in local and national and state crime databases. Vandalism, trespass, destruction of private property, illegal signage, theft, and gang activity. And in fact, the two meta-categories in which urban graffiti are most often categorized by police officials, by politicians, and by the media is as a form of gang activity, therefore lumped in with drive-bys and drug deals and turf wars, seen in that context, or seen as a form of vandalism. And so when I did the research, I found often in the media, either graffiti would be reported in the context of other gang stories, those of you who do media analysis, structural, contextual analysis, or it would be on a page dealing with cemetery vandalism or broken windows at a school, and graffiti being part of that world as well. So for both the public's consumption of the mediated version of graffiti and its actual reproduction in police databases and crime reports, again, theft, trespass, vandalism, and especially associated with either other kinds of property destruction or other kinds of gang activity. Now, in contrast, what's actually going on in urban environments in terms of graffiti? Well, to find out, I spent 5 years inside as a full-fledged member of the Denver, Colorado Hip-Hop Graffiti Underground. Graffiti was beginning to surface in the Colorado newspapers. The mayor of Denver had come out as saying graffiti was the worst crime problem in the city. This was in the mid-1990s. So I decided to find out if, in fact, it was a crime problem, and if so, what sort. So using a long series of sort of tests and contacts, tests of my willingness to be out all night, or tests of whose side I was on, I finally earned the trust of and became a member of the Hip-Hop Graffiti Underground. Over the first year or two, I was taught how to paint, how to fade colors, how to handle a spray can, how to draw designs in the middle of the night. So I became a full-fledged member of this community of people who did murals and other kinds of graffiti at night all over central Denver and increasingly in the suburbs. I supplemented this during that 5 years with trips to London and Amsterdam, with trips to the Bay Area and New York City, because this form of graffiti, hip-hop graffiti, had by that time spread, if not worldwide, certainly throughout Europe, throughout England, Australia, New Zealand, on both coasts of the U.S. So what was a local subculture that I studied had also become a national and international subculture as well. So I felt like it was important to both do the ethnography with the people I knew, but also be able to compare what else was happening in this subculture. So, findings. Well, first of all, hip-hop graffiti is distinctly and avowedly not gang graffiti. Hip-hop emerged as a subculture in the 1970s in New York City as an alternative. Many of the early leaders of hip-hop were ex-gang leaders who were tired of the killing, tired of the gunfire, and said there's got to be a better way to resolve differences and to earn status than through violence. Africa Bambaataa and other early hip-hop artists were, again, ex-gang members and gang leaders. So hip-hop emerged as a distinct and intentional alternative to gang culture, and the idea was through dance, through breakdance competitions, through sampling, DJing, MCing, there were ways of establishing status, getting women, whatever your goal was, that did not involve interpersonal destructive violence. And as hip-hop subculture members will tell you, there are 3 legs to the stool of hip-hop. One leg is dancing, the other is music, and the third leg, ever since the 1970s, has been graffiti. So hip-hop graffiti emerged as a distinct form of graffiti and as a distinct part of a subculture itself organized around music, styles of clothing, styles of language, styles of dance, and this sort of thing. And so early on, many of the early DJs and MCs who first began what now is called rap or hip-hop music were also among the first graffiti kings who invented a style of spraying on walls and designing murals that was reflective of the music and the style of dancing. Short, staccato, bright, highly stylized, much like the dancing and the music. So hip-hop graffiti then emerges as part of a youth subculture, itself formed as an alternative to gang violence and gang life. And when I went inside the Denver Underground and got under the trust of the kids in the Underground, many of them told me over those years that their brother had been in a gang, they saw how much harm that caused, they decided to join a hip-hop graffiti crew. Or their parents had warned them away from gang activity, but in their neighborhood there wasn't a boys' club or a girls' club, there wasn't a youth center, so the alternative to gangs then was to join the hip-hop crew. So you can see one problem already, is if the local authorities, probation officers, police officers are going to prosecute kids for doing hip-hop graffiti as though they're gang members, they are ironically subverting a viable alternative to gang membership. And so in that sense, not knowing that is not only a mistake in a scholarly way, but a profound policy mistake as well. So what drives hip-hop graffiti then? Is it territorial? Is it marking territory? Is it issuing threats, as we know some gang graffiti is? Again, not at all. It seems that way from the outside because hip-hop is organized graffiti around 2 concepts, style and visibility. One is measured by the quality of what one puts on a wall. So when a hip-hop writer tags a wall, that tag has been practiced in a piece book, in a notebook, for months or years before it goes up on a wall, because if it goes up in a sloppy fashion, or a fashion that is not appropriate to the subculture, another hip-hop graffiti writer will cross through it and say, don't write till you have style. In other words, don't degrade the subculture by going up on the walls with something that's not pleasing. In Denver, a hip-hop graffiti writer, a novice, a toy, were to tag a statue or a piece of marble, or in Denver, even brick, was off limits because that was seen to already have an aesthetic, already have a sense of beauty. So if a young writer tagged a statue, the writer would be called out and told, we don't do that. We're artists, we don't tag other people's art. So style then was what measured your status. Style earned you fame, style got you dates, style got you free paint, style got you invitations to join the top crews in Denver and elsewhere in the United States and Europe. And so you were measured exclusively not by your machismo, not by your level of violence. In fact, if you resorted to fighting or verbal threats, that was a loss of status. Because if you got style, you don't need to fight. If you got style, you don't have to talk about it. You simply show it on the walls. And so style was evidenced both in the quality of one's writing, that's why they're called writers, and the quality of one's tags, but especially in the creation of large murals, or called pieces. Because a mural was a group project. Everyone in a crew would work together to design a mural, often 20 or 30 feet by 10 feet, spend all night, sometimes 2 nights doing this mural. It would incorporate everyone's artistic contributions, and so other writers could come by and say, that's that crew's mural, because it shows there's the guy who does characters, there's so-and-so's lettering, only he can fade colors that way. He was obviously here that night, that sort of thing. So both collectively and individually, graffiti was about style. Once again, from the outside, a tag crossed through by another writer might look like a blood tag crossed through by a crib. Might look like skinhead graffiti crossed through by the Latin Kings. But in fact, it wasn't. It had nothing, the meaning was not similar at all. It's not about interpersonal threat or territory. It was about saying you do or don't have the style to remain up on the walls. The other key was visibility. Is the highest status was to combine style and visibility. So to do a stylish tag in a place that was highly visible made it even more valuable because it showed courage and innovation as well as style. So, for example, tagging the heavens emerged in the 1980s and it's still very popular, which is the idea of climbing to the most difficult place, the highest spot on a building, the highest spot on a freeway overpass, and then tagging or doing a piece there. That earns double status because not only is that piece stylish, it will now be seen by everyone in the city. And also will be difficult for the authorities to remove because it's on top of a grain silo, on top of skyscraper under construction, this sort of thing. A few months ago in Houston, a controversy broke out because freeway officials were concerned that suddenly on one of those loops around Houston, they were seeing an increase in graffiti that was blocking out highway signs. And they interviewed police officers and political officials in Houston, and they said, we have no idea what's going on. We don't know why kids would climb up on freeway signs and intentionally deface those signs and vandalize them. It must be that they're trying to attack motorists or confuse drivers. See, they didn't understand, they didn't know tagging the heavens. Had they known tagging the heavens, they would have known better how to appreciate what was going on, but also better how to stop it. Because they would have known why kids would take the risk of climbing up there, why they would do that. One more point about graffiti. Going citywide is another of the highest honors in hip-hop underground. To go citywide means to tag or do murals in each of the city's neighborhoods so that you now are known throughout the city. You now have fame and status, not just in your neighborhood, but around the city. As you might imagine, police officers, probation officers, school officials mistake that for a turf war. They mistake that for a gang invading different parts of the city. So when I was in Denver and began to be known for this research, I engaged in many public debates with officials who said, when graffiti shows up in a neighborhood, that shows gangs are invading that neighborhood. And my argument was, it could. If it's blood or crip graffiti, we can certainly show that. If it's hip-hop graffiti, that shows, in fact, that people are trying to go citywide and are trying to earn higher status. So again, without the knowledge of the underground, even if your goal is to stop urban graffiti, you would not be able to stop it if you do not know the motivations and the stylistic codes by which it was organized. Looking for a watch here. One more point on urban graffiti. The culture, if you know that those are the two focuses in the culture, style and visibility, you can also explain another phenomenon that if you go out anywhere near Huntsville off the railroad tracks, you'll see going by, which is you'll see freight trains going by covered in hip-hop tags and murals. Now again, when I did research on this and interviewed railway officials, they couldn't imagine what was going on. Why would that happen? You already know the answer. Because a freight train is the ultimate in both visibility and transportability of style. To do a piece on a freight train means that train will now be seen by riders in the underground in San Diego or Boston or Dallas or Houston. The train is a portable medium of communication. But that also means you have to tag differently because you have to tag your location on the freight train, where it came from, as well as doing the piece itself. But of course you can't tag your name or your phone number, so you tag your area code in the phone book. So if you look at trains, you'll see 303-817. What's the area code here?
936.
936. So if you know how to read those trains, you'll know that's not hobo graffiti, although there's hobo graffiti on trains. That's not gang graffiti. That's hip-hop graffiti, and it is an expansion of the notion of style and visibility now taken nationwide, right? So if I go citywide, you can go nationwide, and if you know there are subcultures all around the country, you know when that train pulls into Santa Fe or Albuquerque or LA, it will be appreciated. Someone will take a photo of it, post it on a website, write you a note back, the train will circle back through, this sort of thing. I'll go ahead with the other two, and then we'll talk about questions if you have those. A second ethnography I did, which again, as Dennis pointed out, appeared in the book Tearing Down the Streets, was an attempt to account for new kinds of urban disorder. There seemed to be a growth in particular kinds of odd crimes in urban areas, crimes that didn't seem, again, to make sense by conventional explanations. And this is actually a lengthy list. I won't read you all of it, but this is a fairly serious criminal justice issue. Let me just read you how these crimes showed up in crime databases, how mayors, for example, in San Francisco and elsewhere, talked about what for them was an unaccountable new problem in their urban areas. So these are increasingly popular crimes over the past 10 years or so. And see if you can see any pattern here. Obstruction of traffic, obstruction of the right-of-way, destruction of private property, public lodging, which is a euphemism for sleeping on the sidewalk or in the park, public camping, another euphemism for sleeping in the park, loitering, trespass, vagrancy, illegal sitting, and public nuisance. But there's more than that. There's all those which don't seem to have any pattern. A second category that seems to be increasing over the past 10 years is willful violations of city codes. Failure to get permits for a parade, violations of city codes about food distribution, about storage of property on property you own. So city officials also seem to be seeing people who seem to take some kind of pleasure in violating city codes. That makes no sense either, apparently. And the last one, and this gets into very serious area of criminal justice, is federal violations of regulations by the FCC, by the Federal Communications Commission. We have seen around the country in the past 10 years armed raids by FCC SWAT teams on illegal media operations. We have seen willful disobedience of rules that govern the radio dial frequency, the broadcasting of television images, this sort of thing. Turns out those are all the same answer, but that's quite a desperate list of violations. Everything from sleeping in public and obstructing traffic to FCC radio violations and willfully not getting a permit for a parade or to distribute food. So, being somewhat aware of what I thought was going on because of earlier research, guessing that I might be able to figure it out, I began to travel around the country and immerse myself in what I guessed to be and found out to be the subculture responsible. So, just briefly, the ethnography, over about a 3 or 4 year period, this is a short one, involved playing music as a street musician in Flagstaff in the Bay Area and elsewhere. I am a musician, so I was able to do that. Playing with various street musicians, watching what happened to them while playing. I rode with a group called Critical Mass, which is a group of militant bicyclists who their desire is to create space for pedestrians and bicyclists on crowded streets crowded with automotive traffic. Their claim is that an automobile is destroying American cities, and so it's a political and moral act to ride a bicycle instead of driving a car. I discovered pirate radio stations down on both coasts of the United States and actually went on the air illegally with Radio Free Berkeley in the middle of the night, broadcasting illegally and dodging the FCC. And with other, went to the factory, the little secret hidden factory where Radio Free Berkeley makes microtransmitters and distributes them to groups around the country. Something going on there. I hung out with, I did not do this, my knees aren't up to it, but I hung out with base jumpers, which are people who illegally parachute off bridges and buildings. BASE is an acronym standing for Buildings, Antennas, Spans, and Earth. So to be a base jumper, an official base jumper, you have to have parachuted off of a building, a bridge, a span, an antenna, and the Earth itself off the cliff, seemingly unrelated. I hung out in Tempe, Arizona with skate punks and gutter punks, kids who to some degree intentionally live on the street, who seem to take pleasure in defying the authorities' attempts to find them homes or find shelter for them. And finally, I hung out with and worked with homeless activists, not only with homeless folks, but with those who were in an activist mode trying to gain rights for the homeless. Turns out that was the answer to all those crimes that we just saw increasing a minute ago. But of course the question would be, what's the link and why is there a commonality there? Well, a couple of answers. One is that many of these groups overtly claim an anarchist political philosophy. Many of these 16, 19, 20, 25-year-old kids and young adults have read Bakunin, have read Emma Goldman, know the history of the IWW, are well versed and quite intentionally trying to reproduce anarchist political traditions that started in Russia and Europe a century ago, that came to the United States with the labor movements and elsewhere, that bubbled up in Paris in the 1960s, that emerged with the punk movement in the 1970s. So it turns out they're not just happening to not get a permit or violate a police order or block traffic. They see this as a type of politics. And if you probably don't know the history of anarchism, a 2-minute summary. Anarchism is the notion that you don't rely on elected officials to solve problems. You don't ask permission of the authorities. You simply do what needs to be done and pay the price later. So anarchists believe in a notion called DIY, or do-it-yourself, sometimes also called direct action. The idea is, again, if you want a new bike path, you don't ask the city of Huntsville to build your bike path. You build the bike path. If they try to shut down, you rebuild it. But you can get more done through directly doing things than you can through asking permission. And that you ask permission simply vests more power in the authorities who already have enough power over you to begin with. So begging for a new bike path or asking permission to feed the homeless is simply granting more power to those who are the problem to begin with, from an anarchist view. So therefore, morally and politically, you are driven to do things yourself on your own terms. That's both a political imperative and a moral injunction about how you live your life. Furthermore, if any of you are thinking of going to criminal justice, think of the problem this poses. Anarchist groups call themselves not organizations, but disorganizations. They disavow centralized leadership. They do not tend to have websites or mailing lists. Instead, what at first appeared to me to be magic, until I finally figured it out, it's almost a magical ability to get 500 people on one street corner at one time. They do not do it through conventional means. There is no criminal organization to trace. There is no mailing list to seize, because it's all about word of mouth and posting flyers and what they call xerocracy, which is using Xerox machines or text messaging to send messages that can't be traced or to send out flyers. And so there's a famous case in San Francisco where the mayor of San Francisco, a political power broker, wanted to broker a deal with these anarchist groups. There wasn't anybody with whom to broker the deal. There wasn't any leader who would come forward, nor was there anybody to even talk to. So he got enraged and sent the police in against one of their groups because they were a mystery to him. How can you make a deal with someone who won't acknowledge that anyone's in charge? There's an even deeper issue here. Many of these groups, validly, if you read their literature or talk to them, hang out with them, talk about a movement that was called, and I'll make this brief, although it would require a long time to fully explain, situationism. And situationism, the situationist evolved in Europe in the 1960s. Again, were very influential in the punk movement, and today are the hidden thread that links many of these groups I just talked about. Critical mass sees themselves as situationists. Many skate punks and gutter punks draw on this situationist notion. Many of them know that literature, know that tradition, and draw on it. What is situationism? Like anarchism, situationists argue that their only revolution worth fighting is the revolution of everyday life. They argue that you can't say, let's organize for a better world 10 years from now, because the organization itself will get in the way, you'll end up with bureaucracy, you'll end up with leaders who will take the organization in the wrong direction. The only battle we're fighting is right now. The only revolution that can ever be real is a revolution that always reinvents itself every moment. So the situationists are famous. There was a book written by Ferrell called The Revolution of Everyday Life. If you think about that, you can see the problem that's going to pose if you're a probation officer, a police officer, or a concerned citizen, which is first, whatever we did yesterday, we won't do tomorrow. Right? So if you think you got our modus operandi figured out, we can guarantee that won't be the way we do it the next day. Secondly, we don't want you to guarantee that you'll build a bike path, or feed the homeless, or reduce auto congestion, because A, we don't trust you, and B, that's a week from now. We want it right now. And so the only thing we're doing is not to organize for a better world, but as the situation said, to live the better world today. To live the world like you want it to be. Which means that's a whole different kind of activism from the 60s in many ways, a whole different kind of activism from the civil rights movement, creates whole new kinds of crimes. Now you can see some of those crimes, right? Refusal to get a prey permit, obstruction of traffic, obstruction of public right-of-way, sitting or sleeping in public, because the claim is we have the right to do this, and if we don't have the right, the only way to get it is to do it, not to ask you to change the law. One last point, then I'll move on. And this one is fairly complex, so I'll try to make it as simple as I can. The most subversive aspect of this situationist political tradition is what, and I'll try to say this correctly in French, is what's called détournement. And détournement in French actually translates as a theft of meaning. So stealing the meaning of everyday life and making it something else. So the idea of how do you create a revolution for everyday life? You upturn people's understandings. I won't use the pejorative, but you mess with, shall we say, their ability to make sense of their world. You steal the meaning of things and therefore revolutionize the world at the moment you steal what things mean. You overturn what people think is real, therefore causing them to think in new ways. So, for example, all over Berkeley, if you go around where critical mass, that bike group is active in Berkeley, in Boston, Austin, other cities, you'll see stop signs that have underneath the stop on the stop sign the word driving. It's a red sticker. Driving is going to print exactly in the same white lettering and size as stop. Right? You can't even see it's a sticker because they've been very careful to make the red match. And so now the stop sign says stop driving. Your commute to work, which is already troubling enough, right? 45 minutes on the Woodlands and another 45 to here, now is being blocked by a group of bicyclists who aren't only bicycling, but they decorate their bicycles with pinwheels and flowers and are singing songs as they bicycle. Because their idea is, I want to force you to see just how awful it is to commute. In fact, I'm going to make it impossible for you to ever commute again without thinking about how much more fun it would be to be on a bicycle. That's obstruction of traffic, that's defacement of public property, but that's not kids throwing rocks at school windows. That's a political act. And again, do you agree with the political act and want to support it? Do you despise it and want to stop it? Either way, you don't have a chance against it unless you understand the logic behind it. So that list I read a minute ago, all those seemingly unrelated crimes are actually criminal categories that have emerged out of what in effect I would argue is a new urban youth movement, which links homeless activists, gutter punks, militant bicyclists, Food Not Bombs, an anarchist group that feeds the poor without asking for permits. All those groups are actually part of the same, not the same organization, the same disorganization that can't be traced, has no leaders, won't make a deal with you. If you call them in to have a probation meeting, they won't show up. So again, very difficult problem enough, but impossible problem if you don't go inside that world and know what's going on. The last of the three ethnographies. And this is the one that I just finished. This is the book that Dennis mentioned, The Empire Scrounge. I was a tenured professor at Northern Arizona University. I was ready to leave. I was unable to negotiate the deal I wanted to with the university over sabbatical and terms of non-renewal. So I quit. I needed to be back in Texas. My parents needed my help. I've always liked taking risks. So I thought, well, I'll bet I can get into the job. So I simply resigned my tenure professorship. This was at the first of the year. This was actually late December of 2001. So I knew at the very earliest the next academic job would be, if I found one, fall of 2002. So I knew I had about 9 months there to survive on my own for my book royalties, which any of you authors know would be not enough to actually even buy bread and milk, but also to do unfettered research. No IRBs, no forms to fill out, because I wasn't a professor. So I was free to live or fail on my own terms. I'd long been interested in the aspect of society which is people who live on the margins, people who live on the bottom economic rungs and survive off what the rest of us don't need. So I decided to become a dumpster diver. So for 9 months, I was a full-time dumpster diver. I lived as a dumpster diver. I lived exclusively with a little bit of supplement in terms of food. Otherwise, all clothing, all tools, all supplies came from trash piles and dumpsters. And my notion was this was a rare chance as a researcher to actually become the phenomenon. Because again, I was not a professor studying dumpster diving. I didn't have a job in studying dumpster diving. That was how I survived. So if I couldn't figure out how to do it, I wouldn't survive. At least I would have to quit and find work at McDonald's, I guess, or elsewhere. So it seemed to me the perfect situation to do the ethnography. That is, field work that's not sort of part-time on the weekends, but field work where you actually become the phenomenon. So again, every day, no driving, by foot or on an old bicycle that I repaired, put a rear deck on. I simply went out to the dumpsters, the alleys, the trash piles, got to know people, let them teach me how to dumpster dive, how to sort through, I don't know if you're aware of this, there's 7 different grades of copper. You know, to set that copper in and get money for it, you got to know there's a copper 1, copper 2, copper 3. Right? So I didn't know that. And I didn't know that when you took something apart, it was made partly of aluminum, partly of copper. And if you don't separate those two, you won't get paid for it. I didn't know who would buy used clothes. I didn't know how to tell food that could be eaten or not be eaten. So I thought, here's a chance, ethnomethodologically, to learn from the people I'm studying the very method I'm trying to understand. Who are these people? Can you survive at the margins on the trash of consumer society? If so, how? Under what sort of circumstances? So, I want to actually first tell you some findings that are not chronological, and then tell you, I think, the more important criminal justice issue, and then I'll wrap up. The first finding was worse than I could have imagined in terms of what it told us about consumer society. If you think about it, a society that runs on fashion cycles, that every 2 or 3 months there's a new style of jeans, a new style of blouse, a new style of shirt, a society that runs on the advertising notion that this year's coffee maker is far superior to last year's coffee maker. How could you get by possibly with last year's coffee maker? Because this year's coffee maker will wake you up, warm a towel for you, and make coffee. Right? So our entire economy, our entire late capitalist post-modern economy, runs on the notion that we must have the latest product, the latest car, the latest clothing, that sort of thing. By the way, a century ago, Thorstein Veblen first saw this coming, one of the great sociologists and economists. Veblen called that conspicuous consumption, or consuming for status and desire, not for need. Veblen said, even this was 1910, Veblen said people aren't buying stuff anymore because they need it. They're buying it because they've been taught to want it and because it will give them better status with their neighbor to have the new car, the new dress, the newest cell phone, that sort of thing. I had long been fascinated by Veblen, and I thought, if Veblen's right, I can actually test a theory here. And you can surely see where I'm going. If the society runs on hyperconsumption, if every 2 or 3 months we're supposed to throw what we had and get something new, if, as Beto said, we're consuming for status and desire, not for need, where is all that stuff going that we already consume? And my guess was it had to be going to trash piles and dumpsters. Well, again, what I found was more overwhelming than I could ever have imagined. In fact, I was hauling home so much stuff by the 3rd or 4th week that I was taking food to food shelters, clothes to the homeless shelter, bedding to the animal shelter, and giving everything I could to all my friends to the point that they actually began to put in orders. You know, I need a red blouse, or if you find a hammer, let me know. And I would. That's how much is out there in those trash piles and dumpsters. You lose your apartment, you get a divorce, you move off to grad school. At least, I don't know about you, but these folks, it all goes to the curb. A business closes at 5 p.m. with 100 loaves of bread left over in the dumpster. The local Albertsons cleans out the produce cases the other day in the dumpster, fresh produce. One thing I discovered, you grad students, this is important advice for surviving on the economic margins. If the grocery store is selling a bag of 50 oranges and one orange goes bad, throw the bag away. You can't break the bag open, which means you have a bag of 49 good oranges every day in the dumpster outside the grocery store. So what I found was so profoundly overwhelming. And in fact, because I can't read the details, I'll just read this like a poem. I'll just read you just briefly. I just put this list together the other day. There's much more. But here's just, for example, new items still in their packages, barely worn shoes, new clothes, Neiman Marcus sweaters, men's designer suits. This is not one, but I did find 2 designer suits that fit. Others that didn't fit, I passed on. Silk scarves, Oshkosh for the kids, flight attendants' uniforms, military uniforms, appliances, tools, working video cameras, working cameras, silver services, antiques, watches, clocks, cash everywhere, crystal, coffee makers, jewelry, Vermont maple syrup, liquor. I never had to buy beer or liquor because people clear out their liquor cabinets. And went to a party, right? You down half this 12-pack, the other half goes in the trash. Fishing reels, custom hardware, toys, bullets, guns, lamps, doorknobs. It was remarkable. It was the ultimate, I think, condemnation of society that runs on affluence and runs on a disposable consumer society. So it seemed to me here was a chance to test Veblen's theory, not in the abstract, but from the dumpster up. To see, and by the way, I recorded, it got very laborious, but I recorded everything I found for 9 months. Every item I brought home went into a log book, field notes, and therefore became a record of hyperconsumption. 2 more things, though, that weren't quite so critical, and then we'll finish up with the criminology of this. One is, and this I think will, I hope, sort of tug at your heartstrings as well as fellow scholars, thousands of thrown away books. First edition books, 100-year-old books, antique books. The books you and I grew up learning from in college were there in the dumpsters. I couldn't do it. I could not leave those there. Now, those are my friends. Those are the people who I learned my trade from. Right? Been to college, been to grad school, 3 years later, toss those books in the dumpsters. So one thing I wanted to do was evaluate the quality of a book versus its weight. Because on a bicycle, books add up quickly. And a tome, no matter how brilliantly written, is a painful thing to carry home. So I began to develop a system of saying, okay, that's a great work of scholarship, but it sure does weigh a lot. I'll take the condensed work of Shakespeare, not the complete 3-volume set. So I ended up with a library. Again, much of it I donated, but I ended up with I was saying to somebody the other day, Ray Bradbury's book, Fahrenheit 451. I can't remember now, 9/11, but Ray Bradbury's book about burning books. I felt like I was the last line of defense between our culture's knowledge disappearing in the landfill. But even more poignant was, and this really did, in fact, I wrote in the book biographies of people based on this, is I found baby shoes, photo albums from children, high school diplomas, college diplomas, marriage certificates, wedding albums, baby shower gifts, evidence of tragedy, right? Evidence of death, dislocation, divorce. A very prominent local doctor in Fort Worth, who if you look in Fort Worth, you'd know the family name. I found his entire life on the curb. Apparently he had run out of descendants, and so when he died, I guess maybe a distant cousin, put his medical diploma, his medical books, his medical records, his awards all on the curb. So I salvaged those, tried to get it back to families when I could, and wrote histories of people entirely from what their trash showed. And that struck me as an existential lesson, maybe, in the transitory nature of life, or how quickly fame and glory can end up in the trash pile. One last thing. The criminology of this. And this, I think, is important, and once again, it shows perhaps how bad policy comes from lack of ethnographic or particular knowledge. Two trends, and you'll see, I think, where these are going to collide, and I'll just say briefly and then I'll stop. Two trends in the last 10 years or so. We are seeing increasing numbers of people pushed to the bottom economic margins of our society. With the minimum wage not going up, with jobs being exported overseas, with the replacement of old industrial jobs by service economy jobs, you know probably someone in your family or friend who is barely making it even though they're working. And as you know, you've had classes on this, the adage of one paycheck away from the streets. People who, they're making it, but one dental bill, one sick kid, they're out in the streets. So one thing we're seeing is more and more people who are at the very bare margins, maybe some of you, maxed out credit cards, barely paying their rent, right there on the economic margins. And what I found was, and this was my most surprising finding, about half the people I came to know on the streets were homeless. And often touching stories. A homeless guy who modified his bicycle to carry more aluminum cans and welded on, had a friend weld on special baskets. A homeless guy who's wheelchair bound, who wheelchairs around West Fort Worth with two 10-gallon white buckets, picking up cans and then wheelchairs them in the redemption center because his disability check doesn't even cover his food. Homeless folks, again, touching moments where I'm in a trash pile with an elderly homeless couple and she's holding out sweaters to me to see if they'll fit. Right? She's not only looking for herself, she's trying to find me a sweater, you know. So, I mean, in that sense, perhaps our stereotype. People without a home, without a transportation, living off aluminum cans, and found clothes. Sorry, but the most important thing I found, I think, was that roughly half the people were not homeless. They were the working poor. I began to realize this when I found time after time I'd be at a trash pile or dumpster with someone still wearing their church's chicken uniform, still wearing their Walmart name tag. They were on their way home from that $6 an hour job and looking for school clothes for their kids. They're on the way home from a $6 an hour job, trying to find food on the table because the food money had already run out this month. Which to me, again, is a remarkable indictment of our economy. It's one thing for homeless folks to be scrounging. That's enough of an indictment. It's another thing to people who work full-time to be scrounging as well. So, where's the problem there? The problem is that a clear trend in American cities has been to criminalize all of the activities that constitute urban scrounging. In Houston, it's now illegal to lift and live a dumpster. That's a public order offense. In Dallas, there's a bill just passed last year by the City Council, not a bill, an ordinance passed that makes it illegal to possess a shopping cart off the grounds of a supermarket. It's illegal to distribute food or gather food without a permit from the health department in most cities now. Fort Worth, where I live, has clamped down on what they call illegal yard sales. You can only have a yard sale if you get a permit for it ahead of time, and you can have one sign only in your yard and only have 2 sales a year. As you might guess, that knocks out the ability of scroungers to trade their goods for cash through yard sales. In San Francisco, extreme, and the Bay Area, heavy-handed ordinances about, again, it's illegal to touch someone else's trash, to be seen in public with possessions that were not originally your own. Remarkable laws. So my final comment then would be, God help us in terms of where that's leading us. If we increasingly have cities that assume scroungers are filthy, dirty derelicts, and therefore, in the interest of creating more gentrified and, quote, beautiful cities, outlaw dumpster diving and yard sales and trash picking and having a shopping cart, at the same time that more people are pushed to the margins, I don't think you need to adopt proportion crim theory to know that, in Merton's terms, that's some serious strain. That is going to promote, then, worse forms of criminality, more desperation, and an even more aggressive clash between those on the margins and those who are being regulated. So, in summary, all three of these cases, it seems to me, whoever side you're on, however you feel about graffiti or scrounging or bicyclists or homeless folks, you cannot understand the problem, nor create public policy that addresses the problem well if you don't know the particulars, the kind of situated meanings that motivate people that organize their behavior. For me, I don't think those meanings are available to us from crime data, or for that matter, even through survey research. It seems to me that ethnography is not easy, It's not efficient. It takes years. It's not a good idea if you're a doctoral student. It's not a quick way to get your dissertation done, but I do think it's necessary. Thanks.
Wondering, you said when you were dumpster diving, you take stuff home. I was wondering what you meant by home.
I had a home. In fact, I should have mentioned that I had a small house that, but my wife was working at a $9 an hour job, and so through my dumpster diving and her $9 an hour, we could just pay the rent on this little house. So in essence, I was like the 50%. In fact, I guess I hadn't thought of that. I was very much more like the sort of Walmart scroungers than I was the homeless scroungers. Even though I spent all my time in the streets, I had a place to go home to. And by the way, that's a big part of survival, because if you have a home, you can also accumulate things instead of having to constantly dispose of them every day, which makes it even harder to survive.
And did people know, like the three of you said, did they know you were doing research, or did they think you were just simply?
The first two they did, because to me, again, the ethics are you've got to be honest about who you are. The second one, I didn't say I was doing research because I wasn't sure I was. I didn't really know what I was going to be doing. I mean, so in that sense, in fact, as I wrote about in this last book, the other two, I would set up interviews and start the tape recorder. With the scrounging stuff, I didn't feel comfortable setting up interviews because I wasn't an interviewer. I was just out there trying to survive. So I intentionally just sort of let conversations evolve. Sometimes I wanted to ask another question. I thought, no, I'm not going to follow up on that if it's not part of the situation. So, yeah, I would argue, I think most ethnographers, that it's both a good idea and morally your duty to be honest about who you are. But, of course, that's not always simple either, because you may be playing different roles at different times. Yes?
First, in reference to your dumpster diving experience, did that actually change how you live your life now as far as getting rid of stuff and keeping, wanting to have new stuff versus needing new stuff?
Absolutely.
And how long on the first two did it take for those people that, your underground people to accept you and understand that they could trust you with what they were doing?
Two good questions. The first one, perhaps quicker, so I'll answer it first. Yes, certainly, I said to some folks earlier informally, I felt like that year as a dumpster driver was one of the most creative and productive years of my life, because it taught me to be independent. It taught me skills about how to take things apart, put them together, and reuse and cook food. And so, yeah, I found it, in fact, let me just say briefly, many of the dumpster drivers I talked to said, the ones who were homeless said, if it's this or Walmart, I'll just be a dumpster driver. Because to me, they would say, this is like being an urban prospector. It's up to me. I got to go out in the rain. I got to know which dumpster to hit. I have to know how much copper I can haul on my bike. They love the dignity and the independence of it. So, in that sense, I found that too. I found that it did change me. It made me live more simply, want less, and sort of feel more self-confident, And so, in that sense, I found it very valuable. The second question, yes, that's part of, I think, the inefficiency of ethnography, is you don't walk into people's lives and have their trust immediately. So, the first 6 months is slowly proving yourself that you're trustworthy, that you won't rat them out, that you're willing to spend the night under a bridge, or go get paint, or dive in a dumpster. And so it's a long process, and that's a very nice point. Is that often if you read the books later, it just starts on page 1. You're in a dumpster. Well, no, because there's a long process of learning where to go. In the graffiti underground, there were a series of tests I was put through, not formal tests, but how far are you willing to go? How much would you take a risk? So that takes a while, and I think it has to, because you're dealing with people as people, not just as sort of subjects of study.
When you were doing this research, did you have any run-ins with the authorities, and what was that like?
I did. I was saying to someone earlier, the dumpster research was the first time I wasn't arrested doing ethnography. So in that sense, I guess I broke new ground. In fact, I found a very positive sign that despite the criminalization of trash picking by cities, the police on the street, they didn't care. In fact, they were often, are you okay? You need a hand. So I was pleased to see that, for my politics, that the police on the street were far less aggressive about than the mayors of the city council. The other two, because they were more heavily criminalized worlds, there was really no way to avoid legal encounters, because part of what, especially in that second one, what those folks were doing was in a way forcing legal conflict. And so if I'm going to be on the streets with them, I'm going to be in that scene. So in the tearing down the streets research, it wasn't a major thing. It didn't mean court time, but it was obstructing traffic, I believe it was, or that and public disorder, because that's what everyone was charged with who was out on that bicycle ride that day. And so in that sense, I sort of knew that was coming. The graffiti one was more serious, because obviously that was more of a criminalized activity. And once again, I didn't know, but I suspected if I was out there long enough, at some point there would be a problem, and there was. I was out with some kids late at night, and the police came, and everyone was charged. And so That's true, right? I'm culpable, I'm there, it's dirty knowledge, and I'm participating. So, yeah, there is that to deal with, and certainly, doctoral student, new professor, not a wise career move to do hypnotherapy that might get you in trouble legally. But as some of us were saying earlier, that's, I think, therefore, the even greater need for criminological field research, but an even greater difficulty. It's, again, hardly doable, but necessary. And so I don't know how to deal with that contradiction, except sometimes go ahead and take those risks. Yes?
With ethnography, where your subjects know what you're studying, do you really think they can ever get past the fact that you are a researcher, that they actually see you as one of them, or do you think it's in the back of their minds that they do have to watch what they say or try to say what you want them to say?
I think you're absolutely right in the short run. But what I was concerned about that, but what I found in every long-term ethnography I've done is that after a while, you were so much a part of that group, you've so thoroughly earned their trust because you now are spraying paint, you are out on a legal bike ride, that in some ways you really have become part of that group. And you aren't just a researcher anymore, you are in that sense a graffiti writer, a critical mass writer. And so I found that after enough months, your identity had changed so deeply in their minds and perhaps in your own sense of self that as best I could certainly tell, there was no holding back or the other way, or performing for the researcher. Early on, certainly. In fact, one thing I realized looking back on my early days in the graffiti underground was what I took to be normal those first couple of months was actually shows of bravado and intimidation to see how I'd react. So if I had stopped at that point and gone and written it up, I would have actually done a really bad ethnography. A year later, they would say to me, we were just messing with you to see how tough you were, So I think early on there is that sort of performative aspect, but after a while I think you so much become a part of that world. In that sense, I think there's a value to taking those shared risks, because what better bond than having survived risk or arrest or violence? And so in that sense, I think you do get past that barrier to a large degree.
Have you ever had any feedback with your subjects or contact from them after you published?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, to me, part of the, again, if you take a course in qualitative methods, the professor will talk about reciprocity or reflexivity. Part of that, to me, is not only not harming your subjects while you research, but not also just discarding them when you're done. And so now it's been almost a decade since the graffiti research ended, and I still am in touch with a number of those people who I might have maybe then went on to art school, so not exactly the usual criminals. But I still, write letters to them, and many of the people from tearing down the streets I still am in contact with, and I certainly still see some of the dumpster divers. So once again, you cannot be them, and certainly in the long run. But I feel compelled to treat them as people, not just sort of, I'm done now, so.
Did they see your work and respond to it?
Yes, exactly. In fact, when I wrote Crimes of Style, which was the first book I'd written from ethnography, and very passionate about the morality of it, I actually gave the manuscript to the graffiti writers and said, I'm not saying you can veto what I'm saying. It's all this kind of macho stuff. I said, I'm not actually going to change it, but you tell me if you think it's right or not, if I've gotten something wrong, if it made you look bad. And they did. And a couple times they said, well, no, you misunderstood that, or could you not say that because I don't want my mother to ever read that. So, to me, I'm willing to do that. Now, of course, from standards of objectivity, that'd be non-objective, right? You're letting your subjects have a say. But, yeah, to me, it's sort of, if I can't hand it back to those I studied and they can't say that sounds like me, then I think maybe I missed something. Yes?
I've never heard of dumpster diving. It's what came up. Is this only a large city thing?
I think not. I think it's widespread, but it's certainly an urban phenomenon in terms of intensities or collectivities of dumpster divers. Yeah, so, and in fact, by the way, one thing I forget to realize is a city is an amazing trash producing machine, right? I mean, that many people crowd that close together, that many different social classes in a fairly concentrated area, compared to a suburb or a small town, it's an exponential curve, right? So good point. I bet you there's dumpster divers in Huntsville, but per population, I think there would be far more in a big area, urban area, because it's both more possible and there's more variety of resources available there. And I think you probably have higher homeless populations anyway, because that's where social services are and that sort of thing.
I was curious, when you were doing your underground studies, and you were ever a victim of assault or the recipient of physical violence or anything of that nature?
When I was an undergraduate?
No, when you were in your underground studies.
Oh, underground studies.
Or an undergraduate.
I have been a victim of assault or violence, but not during those studies. The closest would be in the graffiti research. There was a subculture that circled around the graffiti subculture called huffers. People would huff spray paint. And it was interesting because in the hip-hop underground, there was, again, such a clear sense, the police might have had a sense, the mayor, but in the underground, the gangs knew we weren't gangs and we knew they weren't hip-hop. And so it was very interesting, actually. You go to a wall and there'd be blood and crypt graffiti, you would just move over and not go over it. In other words, like, that's your part of the wall, this is ours. And the Bloods and Crips and Northside Mafia was the Latin gang in Denver, wouldn't tag on hip-hop, it's like, hey, that's cool art, and that's not a gang, so what do we care? But the only conflict on the walls was skinheads. Is that the one shared enemy of both Bloods, Crips, and Latin Kings and hip-hop was skinheads, because it was a racial thing. So all skinhead graffiti got wiped out immediately. So the tension, at least in terms of the possibility of a fight, was not between ethnic gangs and hip-hop. It was between any ethnic gang and hip-hop and the skinheads. So there was certainly tension there, although I never got an actual fisticuffs. But I'm sorry, but the huffers were a problem, because the huffers would find you in the middle of the night doing graffiti and then start fairly aggressively trying to steal cans of paint to huff or to get high. And so it's ironic that the huffers were the problem, not the gangs. You know? So I never traded blows with huffers, but there were sort of shoving matches and, you know, trying to get everybody together to get them out of the area, that sort of thing. Other comments? Rebuttals? Questions? Thank you.
Since you've been Google having been here, we also want to give you a gift to remember us.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you very much.